voice of the youth be heard. All eyes on Ukraine. Are the other crises forgotten? Is a new Arab Spring around the corner?
In Turmoil, the other crisis, we want to underline other, because we are in Milan, we are in Europe, and inevitably all our attention is drawn by the Ukraine war, obviously. But, frankly speaking, if we look at the Ukraine war from Africa, from Latin America, probably the perception they have is different. It's different because maybe they see this war as a European war, very far from their region, but they suffer the consequences in terms of energy, in terms of food prices. And second thing, from their point of view, there is a risk that the Ukraine war, in a way, overshadows the crisis, the conflicts, or the region, of their region. So this is precisely what we want to talk about in this session. And I would like to start with Agnes Calamar. She's the Secretary General of Amnesty International, one of the biggest NGO worldwide. So my first question to Agnes Calamar is, on forgotten crises, for instance, Afghanistan, among many others, has the international community paid enough attention? And what else should it do to better tackle these other crises? Please.
Thank you very much for the question. But first and foremost, let me thank the organizers of the conference for inviting me. I want to thank ISPI, Bocconi University, and the OECD for giving me the opportunity to be with you today. Indeed, the war of aggression by Russia against Ukraine has been a defining moment for 2022. It has had a devastating impact on the people of Ukraine in terms of massive human rights violations amounting to war crimes. It has, in many ways, also triggered an international response, which for Amnesty International is a model in terms of what we would expect the international community to do when confronted by such a crisis. That response has been characterized by resolutions at the General Assembly, repeated resolution. It has been characterized by denunciation, very public denunciation of the act of aggression. It has been characterized by a strong focus on fighting for justice and against impunity. And that has meant that a number of countries have provided Ukraine with technical assistance for investigation. And of course, the response has also been characterized by the International Criminal Court very quickly beginning an investigation officially into the war crimes committed by Russia. So that response is a model for the way the international community should respond to crisis. Sadly, though, in 2022, the international community has not used that blueprint for the other crises the world was confronting. That include the crisis in Ethiopia, which for many experts is probably the deadliest conflict in decades around the world, in decades. We haven't seen any strong reaction to the situation in Palestine, the occupied territories, and there too, 2022 was an absolute terrible year, particularly for people in the West Bank, because this was the deadliest year for the Palestinians, characterized by around 150 deaths, including children. In 2022, as well, as you have mentioned, the Taliban has increased its war against women and girls of Afghanistan and against freedom more generally. In 2022, the situation in Haiti triggered massive displacement of refugees outside Haiti because it was so awful and deadly. I'm not mentioning and talking about the situation in Venezuela, the situation in Yemen, the situation in Mali. None of those crises have received the same degree of attention than Ukraine.
Well, among the crises you mentioned, there is one missing, which is the situation in Myanmar. So my question to you is, what humanitarian and political steps should be taken by the international community to alleviate the suffering of the population which is under a military junta?
I was in Thailand a month ago, and of course the situation of Myanmar is on top of the agenda, both for the government and for civil society. And it's clear that the international community is not doing enough for the people of Myanmar. They have relied a great deal on ASEAN and on the ASEAN countries to lead on the response to the military coup, but the ASEAN has clearly failed in that mission. It is therefore more than time for the international community to step in where ASEAN is failing. What does that mean practically? What would we like to see? First of all, we need to see far more emphasis on the protection of refugees. There are millions of them outside Myanmar right now, including the Rohingyas, who have been in camps in Bangladesh under really harsh conditions. There is insufficient commitment to their resettlement, and that needs to be a priority for the international community, along with stepping up the assistance to the refugee population outside Myanmar. We need to multiply the effort to exfiltrate all those that are facing the risk of arbitrary arrest and worse. The United States must now really completely implement the US-Burma Act, which is an important step in holding the military junta to account. We need to push for international accountability, including much more effort for the International Criminal Court investigation, and we need to support investigation in the same way that we are supporting them in Ukraine. And very importantly, there needs to be a stop to any kind of military assistance and support to the junta. So there must be an embargo. So we to find new ways of exerting pressure on the military junta. This is why Amnesty International late last year published a new report called Deadly Cargo, where we focused on the country's aviation fuel supply chain. We focused on the companies, the commodity companies that are trading that fuel, particularly with the junta and the militaries in Myanmar. We have highlighted how this supplies of fuel is enabling the Myanmar military's attacks on civilian population, and we have called for sanctions targeting those that are part of that supply chain. Following our report, the UK has announced sanctions targeting 2 Myanmar companies and 2 individuals that Amnesty International had identified. In March 2023, the United Kingdom announced a second round of sanctions targeting individuals and companies that had been exposed in Amnesty International research. The European Union and the US have also announced sanctions targeting companies or individuals that are playing a role in the importation, the storage, or the distribution of this aviation fuel that is being used by the military in Myanmar. So that is an example of ways in which the international community can impact the military's action, really targeting the militaries, ensuring that the rest of the population is protected against the impact of the sanctions. And that is what is required right now. We need to explore all possible ways for exerting far more targeted pressures on the militaries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for being with us today. Now, let me introduce the panelists, the high-level panelists I'm glad to have here today with us. Let me start with Karim El Enawi, Executive President of the Policy Center for the New South, Professor Emanuela Del Rey. She is the EU Special Representative for the Sahel. Pamela Tamaro Pinto, she is one of our future think tank leaders and Academic Director of ISPI in Colombia. So, Karim, let me start from you. I will make a very sharp question. A few years ago, there was, the rise in the price of food, bread, and this led or contributed to the Arab Spring. Today, we have the Ukraine war. One side effect, so to say, is again rising prices of food and bread. Should we see another Arab Spring around the corner?
Well, good afternoon and a pleasure to be here. Well, I have no crystal ball.
Of course.
It's not hiding here.
Are you sure?
I think inflation was already there before the Ukrainian situation. There were commodity prices were already increasing, issues with supply chain, around the world, the demand boom beyond the COVID, expansionary fiscal policies around the world. So I don't think this is a short-term situation. Inflation is here and it's going to stay for a while before it goes down. Core inflation, service inflation is increasing. So it's not only about food. Food is part of the story. But come back to your question, again, I don't think food prices have led to the phenomena we had in 2011. It sparked it, but there were some structural reasons why people are not happy. All around the world, this is the mechanism of revolts, revolutions, demands, social demands for transformations. And just happen at a time where, it's something that sparks the situation and inflames it. I don't think we're in this situation. We have to look at what countries have been done. It's been more than 10 years.
Sure.
And look at the picture of the region. COVID happened in the meantime, and governments were tested in their capacity to respond. What I take from this is that you need to cultivate your garden. You need to take care of your garden. You need to take care of your internal fronts. Societies are divided everywhere. There's nothing really specific about the MENA region. When I look at the situation in liberal democracies with the polarization of political scenes, it's a bit similar. You know, the middle class is being hit, competition, on labor markets, declassification of some of categories. Everything is happening as well in the region. What I would say is that the demand is for a social state, not a paternalistic state, not a rent, seeking state where you distribute rents, which we see in the region, particularly in oil exporting countries. So you need to have an efficient, functioning social state that delivers basic, I would say, kind of, it's very simple, but at the same time, it's not easy to deliver. But, good education, good health service, able to de-risk also the environment for citizens. So I think we are all at the same stage on that, that the welfare state is being under pressure all around the world, including in Europe. It needs to avoid rationing and queues for medical services. So if the governments in the region are not delivering, you may have another situation in specific countries, but I don't think you will see an overall story. And I will conclude on that. There was a political dynamism, which we called frérisme, the Muslim Brotherhood that was rising at that time. And that has been, we are beyond this curve. I'm not a specialist, but I look in the situation in Morocco. They were, they lost the elections, so democratically, they're not anymore after 10 years, 2 mandates as head of governments. In Tunisia, you follow the situation. Let us see in Turkey what's going to happen. But the world has moved on. Those, what you call the Arab Spring, they were also manipulated by political forces that were from, that were from this angle of the political spectrum in those countries. That was one of the common, in Egypt as well. So, in a nutshell, I don't think so, but governments have to deliver, and they have to deliver for their citizens.
Clear-cut message, thank you. So let me move now to the special representative, Professor Derret. The UN condemned Russia Wagner Group for its human rights violation in West Africa. So my first question is, what's your view, of course, on this violation? And then more broadly, does Russia represent a long-term threat to the stability in the Sahel? Please.
Thank you for this question, and I would like to say that whatever is said here today is all interconnected and interdependent. And of course, when we talk about violation of human rights, we talk about a huge effect on the population, especially the fact that the population feels even more neglected by the center of power. And of course, this kind of marginalization produces even more conflicts. This is unfortunately something that in West Africa, and in particular in the Sahel, which I define the real southern border of Europe, just to give you an example, meaning that it is part of our destiny by all means. Of course, it acquires a specific dimension that becomes even more worrying and even more important to tackle and to address. Regarding the Wagner Group, there is something new that happened very recently, which is the fact that the UN released a specific report on a massacre that took place last year in March, in 2022, in Moura, in central Mali. Why do I say that this is new? It's because until now, of course, there have been a huge number of accusations. We know that the Wagner Group is present in the Central African Republic, for instance. It has been present in many conflicts. But as regards this part of the world, certainly there is a saying that Wagner is actually violating human rights. But when it comes to a specific report with a specific investigation, of course, this changes a lot. What does this new element mean? It means that there is a rise in awareness, not in Mali in particular, because Mali is now trying to strive on how to justify this report and say that this report, of course, is saying lies, and of course they would like to bring about their own ideological truth. But the reality is that there is a raising awareness in the Sahel, for instance, on the part of heads of states like Al-Ghazouani, the president of Mauritania, but also President Bazoum of Niger, and also civil society, that these groups are not guaranteeing any kind of security. In terms of the relationship with Russia, you know very well that the Wagner Group is a group of mercenaries. They act without proper rules of engagement. They are not a regular army. They are a good excuse for Russia to be present in a territory and not to be responsible for what they do, because they are not part of the state. They are not the Russian army. So in this very difficult moment in which Russia is trying to penetrate the situation in Africa, and it is very present, and now, although it has been present for decades, in this particular moment is doing it in a function related to the war in Ukraine. That means against the Europeans and like-minded countries, like, for instance, the United States, UK, and Canada, I don't know, Norway. Of course, this becomes much more dangerous, also because Russia, that has never been able to really influence the political process in the region, is able to spread disinformation, very painful disinformation that is feeding the unsatisfaction of the populations, also because it is working on vulnerabilities and on conflicts. The more conflicts, the more vulnerabilities, the better it is for Russia, and especially for the Wagner Group that exploits the situation.
Thank you very much. Now, Pamela, we started also from Afghanistan, Myanmar, now MENA region, Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America. If somebody just joined us, he would think that it's a sort of heaven with no crisis, which is absolutely far from reality. So, what are, in your view, the crises to be watched in Latin America? Please.
Well, first, thank you for having me here. And I have to say that Latin America is not a quiet region. Besides drug traffic, we have a lot of problems to lead to crisis. First, I have to say the political instability. This, with protests in several countries like Colombia, Brazil, Chile, the economic crisis we saw yesterday in Argentina, and the leadership changes like the removal of Pedro Castillo in Peru. These factors that are a result the social policies and economic policies and internal and external disinformation and manipulation, I believe. Another point on stability is the shifting power dynamics in the region. We have a declining influence on the United States and increasing presence of Russia and China. So this can be seen economically with the growing Chinese investment on all Latin American countries. And in terms of security, we have the Wagner Group presence in Venezuela. So it indicates that the region is moving away from the diplomacy promoted by the Western countries. On the other hand, according to 2021 Global Organized Crime Index, Central and South America are the most crime-ridden region in the world. So we have drug traffic distribution is like a big issue and Colombia issue. So this is a distinct element in global geopolitics because the drug cultivation and the traffic generate violence and conflicts with the region and also impact beyond its borders, founding terrorist groups like Boko Haram, which becomes a threat to European territory and Africa. And the drug traffic is associated with human traffic, money laundering, and global terrorism. So the impact is huge. It's kind of difficult to have an amount, but it's estimated that for Colombia is the 2% of the GDP, so it's almost $4 billion USA, just Colombia. So, very unfortunately, Latin America, it could be considered one of the epicenters of global crisis. I have to say that we have faces multiple change, the political instability, economic inequality, corruption, and organized crime. So we may not experience the same level or ethnic conflict like other regions, but we have all these issues.
Thank you, Pamela. Now, Karima, let's zoom out for a moment from a specific region, because yesterday there was the debate between Paolo Magri and Thomas Gomar, and Thomas was talking about these blocks which are created in a multipolar system to some extent. Now, if we do a flashback in the Cold War, we remember that there were the so-called non-aligned states. Well, now fast forward to today, we see some countries moving, from one block to another, not really non-aligned, I would say multi-aligned, because they are in different association, organization, and so on. It's quite a mess. So, what's your view on that?
Well, first of all, one word
Please.
For our friend from Amnesty International. She gave a list of countries, and she compared to the Ukraine-Russia war. There's a simple reason. One is systemic. The others are not. I'm sorry to say, but we don't do international affairs with morale. That's what we are, human beings. Of course, Russia and Ukraine is a systemic story, because then when it's going to stop? So they are the ingredients of something much bigger. Of course, the situation in Sudan, in Mali, etc., is systemic for Malians and Sudan, but it's not systemic for the world. So I'm not saying anything crazy. And actually, this is why we see this reaction. And I can tell you that most politicians in the world understand that. It's not. And it's not the discourse of the Global South or the New South, which is linked to your question. We are in a fluid world. There's more space, more freedom. If I look at the distribution of individuals in this room, they have chosen not to sit in the first 2 rows. Why? We can ask why. I would have felt
They are reserved.
warmer if you were close to me. They're very cautious, They don't know this crazy Karim, he can jump there. We never know. Let's hedge our bet. I may need to go out. I don't want Paolo or Antonio to see me if I'm an ISPI member. I stay in the back, in the middle of
Karim,
the
let me ask you something. I mean, is this I understand, of course, that any country can take advantage of the situation. It's totally understandable. Is it desirable?
So wait, if you are a monopolist, you have a strategic rent. Europe, basically, the transatlantic traditional North, US and Europe, enjoyed, and I think they delivered also peace and security for the world. They enjoyed a strategic rent. They paid a high price for that, which is the 2 world wars of the 20th century. They created this world order, and they produced the international law, and it worked. They delivered. What was, let's say, the adhesion, whether you were in this block or the other? Why do I accept to be under sort of your umbrella? Because you provide me security.
Sure.
And I had one decision to make, be here or be there. Today, this is much more fluid. It's open. I have freedom. I can move. It's nice. I'm free, like your kid, you know, he was going to move around, okay? So people are moving. Today I'm an alliance with X, tomorrow I'm with Z. Why it is difficult, to whom it is difficult? To those guys who have the rent, because they have to adjust. It's a new world, it's transition. For us, in general, it's freedom. And it is a difficult adjustment, it is a difficult transition, but I'm sure the process, it is being processed within society, in Italy, in Europe, in the US, as also it is challenged, of course, by China, which has created space. I don't want our friends in Europe, particularly, to feel that it is a world that is emerging against them. It's important for the younger generation. This is your world. It's going to be shaped as you want it to be shaped. You're not passive, you're an actor. You've decided to sit in the back of the room. It is your decision. You could have decided to sit here. You should decide what do you want to do with the UN. You're part of the international community. So it's not good to stay behind, oh, we've lost our great world, because today you have to listen to others. Okay, it's more difficult. It's like, you know, a monopoly, a public monopoly in telecom. It was difficult in Italy, in Morocco, for the mobile competition to come. It's only 30 years ago. It was a crisis in Morocco, and then now everybody is happy. So I think this is why this period, it's tough, it's an adjustment, it's tougher for incumbents, it's tougher for advanced economies. We had this strategic rent, because now it's more complex, it's more fluid, and they're disturbing me, you know, all these guys doing alliances around, and I don't know where they are, and they should be faithful for us and to us. And so what I invite you, and I think this think tanks are here for that. You need to discuss, to exchange, to listen to each other, to develop this kind of world we want. And I think around the Mediterranean, with Africa, Europe has a specific role to play, and there is demand for Europe in Africa. It's not like there is a conflicting relation on every single issue. There is a demand, but it's going to be more difficult. It's going to take you more political capital, more bandwidth, more dialogue, and also to listen to the others. So that is my reading of the situation.
Thank you, Karim. And you mentioned the very difficult situation in Sudan. Professor Derre, you are the EU Special Representative for the Sahel. So in light of today's awful situation in Sudan, do you expect the instability to spread in the wider Sahel region? And what should the international community do also to avoid a scenario like this?
Well, connecting to what has just been said, I would like to react.
Please.
And I would like to say that freedom of movement, I think it's a bit idealistic if we think about the people who cross the Mediterranean and lose their lives there. So probably we have a problem with freedom of movement, number one. Number two, I would like to say that regarding the future leaders, of course, I am sure that this room is full of future leaders, but as regards other parts of the world, like Africa, for instance, they might be future leaders, but they don't have any instrument, very little instruments. And this is why we have the responsibility to intervene on that. I have to say that I'm proud to represent 27 member states of the European Union, which are all focused on the idea that we have absolutely to intervene to help the youth to grow. I would like to highlight these points because it's very important. Third point, in fact, all the crises are connected. If you think about the importance of the latest vote against the UN resolution against Ukraine, which was voted against by 7 countries in the world, and these 7 countries are in 5 continents. Meaning that you have Mali, you have North Korea, you have Eritrea, you have Venezuela, of course. This means that the impact of this equilibria that the war in Ukraine is determining are incredibly strong, and they are not localized. They are absolutely global. the Sudanese crisis falls into this situation, more general situation. Of course, I'm very superficial, sorry, because I don't have the time, but I always make an appeal to complexity. Examine the complexity of the situation, because if you are superficial, we don't see exactly what is happening in the world at the moment. Regarding Sudan, it's very pertinent to the Future Leaders Forum, because you know that Sudan, at one point, had a very strong, inspirational mood, which was actually created by the youth. I was in Sudan, in Khartoum, at the university with the student who made a fantastic revolution to change the country. So now that there is this horrible conflict, of course, the first feeling that is actually having an impact also on the surrounding countries, but also on us Europeans, is the discouragement. The fact that we have invested so much in the country, we were really trying to make a huge effort. And apart from anything, Sudan is one country in which civil society and the international NGOs have been working for decades, doing a fantastic work together with the local population. So the actual first impact of this Sudanese crisis is the fact that there is a discouragement also on the part of the international community. And you have to understand that when I act in my job, which is a difficult job, I'm sorry to say, I have to convince the 27 member states of the European Union that it is worth to intervene, it is worth to invest, it is worth to give money to these countries. So you can understand how serious the situation is. Of course, we can also talk about the fact that there are side effects like the huge flows of refugees, a huge impact in terms of economy, and also, of course, politics in the general situation in the region.
Thank you very much. Well, both of you started with freedom of movements. And freedom of movements matters a lot also in Latin America. Now the number of immigrants or people trying to reach the United States is peaking actually, for decades. So what can be done? I mean, there is anything really, very briefly, because we are running out of time, but yes, what could be done, I mean, to manage such a huge movement of people?
Well, it's very complicated because the biggest challenge that we face is not having a clear religion plan for the immigration phenomenon that involves the United States and Latin American countries. And well, the relationship the United States with Venezuela is complicated right now, so there are no future on this. So, and the lifting of the Title 42 last week is creating I don't know, maybe fear in the region because migrants is going to be over and over, and the solution, the big solution, or we have to work with all the countries and also address the root cause of migration. That implies, well, is poverty, violence, and lack of opportunity, and we need to promote in Latin American countries economic development and security, social inclusion, and the rule of law. And that maybe, but it's not secure that happens, but that maybe helps reduce the region why people feel the need to go somewhere to get a better future and a better condition for life.
When I mention movement,
please,
is strategic movements, it's not migration. When I say it's a multi-alignment, poly-alignment, minilateralism, so multiple sort of relations with others. Okay. My point was absolutely not about migration.
Okay. Clear. Maybe I can make a last question, because you are also an expert on the Balkans. Yes. I know that, of course, now you're dealing with something else. Still, can you say something about the situation also in this region?
Well, yes, it is true. The Balkans are in my heart. I spent many years there in very, very difficult years. And I'm very happy to see that the situation has radically changed in terms of condition of people, in terms of advancement of the different dossier to make the countries of the Balkans become members of the European Union. It is true that there are still a lot of difficulties in the relationships between the different countries of the Balkans. It is true that there is a wonderful, formidable human capital, as there is in Africa and elsewhere, of course, and it is our fault that we are not exploiting it in a positive way, of course. And I have to say that regarding the advancement of the process of integration, I think that we are going very slow. Honestly, I have seen during the years the countries striving to respect the conditionalities that were rightly imposed in a positive way by the European Union to adjust the normative system, to make the necessary reforms at social and economic level. But at the moment, I think that the fact that they have actually done a lot should be also recognized, also because the political leadership in each country needs to demonstrate to the public opinion, you know that I was also a politician, to demonstrate to the public opinion that what they are doing is actually working and it's obtaining some sort of reward. Otherwise, they are stuck in this situation. And apart from anything, they are absolutely ready, and that would be a wonderful achievement for us. Everybody says so. We need to make a step forward. Certainly, the war in Ukraine has changed everything, because unfortunately, being in Europe at the moment, I notice that all our efforts, all our energy are devoted to this war. And I want to praise the European countries for welcoming the refugees, of course the Africans for welcoming the refugees. Consider the Chadians that are now welcoming 300,000 refugees. The South Americans, I know that there was this Quito agreement that I mentioned so many times. All the countries organized themselves when there was a huge, horrible crisis in Venezuela to welcome refugees. And this was, I thought, a fantastic way for communities, because we are only one community, to react to a serious crisis. So these things have to be kept in mind. And the future leaders, of course, have to contribute to this and teach us what we have made wrong and what we could do better.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thank you for being with us now. Well, now, actually, yes, please, madam. This way, yes, please. Thank you. Thank you. So, this event is co-organized, co-hosted by OECD, and the Secretary General of the OECD, Matthias Cormann, was supposed to be with us. He cannot be with us, but